Hi, everybody. I am Hayley Mitchell Haugen. I am the editor of Sheila-Na-Gig Online and Sheila-Na-Gig Editions. Tonight, we are celebrating the work of poet John Palen and celebrating his work Riding with the Diaspora from Sheila-Na-Gig Editions. We also have a great lineup of open mic readers from our summer edition. So welcome and thank you for being here and enjoy the show. So John Palen is a lifelong Midwesterner. He's worked as a store clerk, a draftsman, a newspaper reporter, an editor, a journalism teacher. Over the last 50 years, his poems have appeared in publications such as Poetry Northwest, Sou'wester, Birmingham Poetry Review, and The Formalist, and anthologies published by Wayne State University Press and Milkweed Editions. He won the Passages North Poetry Competition in 1989 and has been a Pushcart and Best of the Net nominee. He earned a doctorate in American Studies at Michigan State University and is awarded a National Endowment for the Humanities Journalism Fellowship at Johns Hopkins University. Mayapple Press brought out Open Communion, New and Selected Poems in 1994 and Distant Music in 2017. Recent work has appeared in Cider Press Review, Sleet, The MacGuffin, Willowa Journal, Sheila-Na-Gig Online, Off the Coast, Great Lakes Review, and Delmarva Review. He lives, writes, and gardens in Illinois Grand Prairie, on the Illinois Grand Prairie. And I'm so honored to have had the opportunity to publish John Riding with the Diaspora from Sheila-Na-Gig Editions. So if you don't have this book yet, I'll be putting a link to this in the chat. And for those of you watching on YouTube later, I'll have a link on the last page of the reading. So welcome, John. So excited to have you here.
Thank you, Hayley, for that generous introduction and for all you've done for me and for poetry. Sheila-Na-Gig is a great place to be for writers and readers. Hayley's boundless energy, good sense, and artistic vision make that happen. I'm grateful to her and to all of you for turning out tonight. I'll start with a few poems that directly address the governing concept of the book, the experience of diaspora, scattering, mixing, displacement, migration, homesickness, alienation, otherness. This poem is called After a Funeral, Soccer in the Street. He and his parents made it out in '38. Others in the family didn't. Word came slowly, if at all. He was quick to argue, quick to anger, shouted like stentor with the voice of 50 men, knew operas by heart, rose early, always first on the slopes. I saw him toward the end, rapt, Die Zauberflöte playing across his face in a dark cinema, head held straight and still. Parkinson's had thinned the voice to a whisper, taken away the ski legs, revealed a different man. At the funeral, a daughter spoke. Who would have thought my father would have handled this with such grace? That afternoon, his children and their children and partners and spouses, those he loved and yelled at, played soccer in the street in shirt sleeves in the December light. 2 sexes, 3 genders, 4 languages, swooping and crossing each other's arcs like swallows in flight. Here's a little poem about a scattering of bones on a Texas lakeshore that represents a small part of the African diaspora story. Freed Slave Cemetery, Texas. After 7 years of drought pulled back the lake's gray blanket, photographers and gawkers saw uncovered pine coffins, forgotten tombstones, scattered bones. Some limbs bore age deformities, knitted lines from old fractures. Others were straight, graceful, as though these children might awaken from a troubled sleep to appear and testify about terrible crimes, then tumble out among birdsong and dry grass to breathe and play in the free air. Chicago artist James Bolivar Needham was born in 1850 in Chatham, Ontario, where his parents settled after escaping slavery on the Underground Railroad. Needham was a deckhand on the Great Lakes and helped paint murals for the Chicago Columbian Exposition of 1893. Largely self-taught as an artist, he concentrated in his maturity on painting scenes along the Chicago River. He died in poverty in 1931. This poem is a reaction to one of those paintings. The title of the poem is North Branch Chicago River. The title of the painting is Halsted Street Bridge, 1918, and James Bolivar Needham is the speaker of the poem. Crossings brought me here. One from Africa generations ago, one that my parents undertook on the Underground Railroad to Slave Haven, Chatham, Ontario. My own as a deckhand on the lakes, learning to see water as an artist, teaching my hand to paint. At the Columbian Exposition, I was hired help on the murals. That's how I came to be a Black artist in the White City. Chicago roars upward, reaches high, rebuilding in steel after the Great Fire. I like to paint this low, quiet place where the inferno drew up just short of old wooden buildings at the tip of Goose Island, where only pine masts scrape the sky above orange and green hulls. A lift bridge with double arches keeps passages open, up and down the river, across the city, across time. I'm like the bridge tender, whose tiny red-roofed house I daubed in at one end of the span. I keep an eye out. Here's another Chicago poem, Window Tables in the Loop. Walking past, I see them in pairs behind etched glass in pricey restaurants, matrons in black pantsuits, pale blouses and peacock scarves, with perfect eyebrows in copper bas-relief. They eat deliberately, a salad, nodding and smiling at each other, but not at us, never a glance, though they know we're here. Tourists, gawkers who know nothing about carrying the weight of Chicago. I imagine them as high-cheeked girls growing up in the Polish Triangle, married early to big men who shouldered their way through life until they were seized by their own hearts and wrestled to the ground. The widows reserve these window tables. They have earned every fine touch, so they can be seen and admired, and I do. Another very consequential diaspora movement in North America was the western spread of Europeans across the prairies. Here's a poem about that in 3 parts. Prairie Suite. 1. Prairie's a hairy beast, humped brown shoulders full of lice and ticks, wet, smelly sex tangle in her underparts. Blowing snow, she doesn't give a damn. Spring makes her pretty, she doesn't give a damn. I like to walk in that indifference. 2. Musk thistle mixed with seed in a sack or caught on a coat. Wind catches a tuft and away it goes across Nebraska to points west. Garlic mustard, purple loosestrife, smallpox, cholera, not far behind. 3. We've parked our vans at the jumping off places, noses pointing west across the river toward a sunset of gold. Bug spatters on the windshield trouble the view, gray ghosts of the Sac and Fox. Here the 49ers dug a slope down the bank to float wagons across, loaded with flour and hardtack, beans, rice, coffee, tobacco, a barrel of whiskey, good as a tank of gas, and a credit card. This poem is part of a series titled not by the names of places, but by their population. This is population 546. Tracks cut the town in half. 2 bars, a store, and a church on one side, shaded homes on the other. Elevators that once rumbled with cascades of grain stand empty now. Children play red light, green light on an abandoned spur where grass goes to seed in the rail bed. There's no interstate access. The villagers have made peace with that. Amtrak never runs on time. Freights pass through whenever, blocking grade crossings at will. No clocks in the mountain monastery, says the man who keeps the produce stand, a Buddhist refugee gardener who washed up here from Saigon in 1975. Well, we've got a little diaspora thing going right here today. It's great to see so many friends here from so many places: Illinois, Oregon, Michigan, Colorado, New York, my sister from Texas. Welcome. Thanks for being here. It is a particular honor to give a shout out to Rachel Barton, who published 8 of the poems in this book in her online magazine, Willowa Journal. Great to have you here, Rachel. And I also want to acknowledge Judith Kerman of Mayapple Press, my publisher, mentor, and friend for 40 years. Thanks for coming, Judy. I'll read some poems now about myself. Campbell's Tomato Soup. Long before it was a series of prints on canvas that helped make Andy Warhol rich and famous, and long before it became something sneered at by foodies and people who never cook at home, and long before it was renamed Classic to distinguish it from the 18 other choices, including Disney Mickey Mouse, Healthy Request, Harvest with Basil, and Parmesan Bisque. It was something my mother served for lunch with saltine crackers, peanut butter, and milk, because it saved time for her to open a can, add water, heat it in a pan, and pour. No parsley garnish, no swirl of anything on top, just plain hot soup in a bowl in a tiny kitchen that looked out on a chicken coop, a vegetable garden, an unpainted wooden gate where tramps left marks, to tell each other that if one came and asked, he would be fed. He would be fed. This is a poem that didn't find a place in the diaspora book, but I want to read it as a companion piece to the poem about my mother. My father's 38. Fired into the sky each New Year's Eve, it was his go-to-hell insurance policy against burglars and commies, his role play as a tough guy dandy from the town's wrong side. When I asked where the slugs came down, thinking they had to somewhere, he said no one would be hurt who had sense enough to stay indoors. A shrouded Hammer Smith & Wesson, it nested in a tin box with car titles, the mortgage, and his old draft card. Home alone, I'd play tough guy myself. Get it out, load it, spin the cylinder, then shake the bullets out in my palm. When cancer broke in and took everything, my bedridden father began to ask, "Where's my gun? Where's that old gun I had?" Mother lied until she tired of lying, then put it in a paper sack with a box of bullets and took them downtown to the sheriff. When she told my father what she'd done, he lashed out at her, which he almost never did, and then he wept and took her hand. My mother's family published a local weekly newspaper in Missouri. The editor's office and back shop of the Bolivar Free Press are among my earliest memories. Hayley published this poem in Sheila-Na-Gig and nominated it for Best of the Net. Thanks, Hayley. There's jargon here from the hot type printing era, and it would take a long time to explain it all, so just trust me. The back shop. Deep in the back of the building, far from Uncle Ralph's genteel office with its revises and flimsies, Uncle Pete had his domain, hot as a foundry, busy as hell, wheeled iron turtles, chases, coins, and a hell box, the linotypes, metallic clatter, smells of gasoline and cigarettes, oil and grit on every surface, a thinning oval of lava soap on a basin stained with ink and rust. He sends me to the alley for lead pigs, 2-foot gray bars in a pile among tall dandelions. From a hooked chain, they'll feed a melting pot at 700 Fahrenheit, hot enough to explode if he spills his Coke. Deadline nears. His quick 2-fingered jabs add substance and weight to words by casting them into type. As a boy, I lived near the Kansas and Texas Railroad tracks, the KT line, and train sounds at night allowed me to imagine a larger world. Listening to the Katy train. The backyard was where my mother hung laundry out to dry between 2 crosses, her homesickness and our shabby house, where my father nursed his weariness alone and hid the empties under the trash. Between our lot and the Katy tracks, tangled, scabby apple trees went feral. That was where I found nearsightedness, squinting through an air rifle's notched iron, the blurred distance closing in. I was 11 that year Stalin died in his own cramped quarters in the Kremlin. Fixing supper for myself, I heard the news on radio. That night, beyond the ruined orchard, the Katy train blared and rumbled out to open country, shaking earth. Two more. The title of this poem refers to something that medical students are required to do: memorize the 206 bones of the adult human body. It doesn't make you a doctor, but it's a start. Learning the bones. This is about becoming a journalist, not becoming a doctor. Learning the bones. That was the summer I packed poetry in a box and wrote obits. Hundreds, from little towns like Neosho, Veneta, and Siloam Springs. I left Pound, Virgil, and the New Criticism arguing in the dark in a friend's basement, and wrote plain words about plain lives in a sunlit second-story newsroom full of desks, ashtrays, and phones. The dead had dates, idiosyncratic names, survivors who cared. No poem I've written before or since has mattered as much. I'd stay up late, poring over the day's work. Accuracy, spelling, grammar, brevity. That was the summer I learned the bones. And I'll end with another Chicago poem about one of the world's busiest crossroads, St. O'Hare Cathedral. Not enough snow to bother a Chicago cabbie, but enough to jam the airport with delays that cascade nationwide. Hope for a flight home coughs and flames out. I'm rebooked for 6 a.m. The hotels are full, so I eat a stale Danish, spread my coat on a 3-seat bench, and try to sleep. Hours later, I'm rolling in the stagnant pond of self like a dying carp. If I drift off, the seat divider under my hip goads me awake again. And then I sleep. And then I wake to perfect stillness, watery blue light flowing in through tall, clear windows under an arched ceiling. And into that high silence, a janitor pushes a wide mop and sings quietly to himself, a blues, a hymn. Thank you so very much. Thank you.
Lots of virtual clapping going on here. Thank you so much, John. It's just wonderful to hear the poems from the book, and sorry for the delay of having this reading. I don't know what happened there, but so I'm so glad we had this opportunity to finally hear you. Thank you so much. And next we have some readers from Sheila-Na-Gig Online summer issue to celebrate some work there. So we are going to open our open mic reading with Penelope Moffet. Welcome, Penelope.
Thank you. I'm going to read 2 poems. The first one is from the summer issue of Sheila-Na-Gig, and it's called Kumquat. The tree lights up the yard, radiant with fruit. I can't think what they are, cry, tiny oranges? My friend replies, kumquat. 1,000 suns on branches, some fallen to the ground. Windfall, I say, although the air is still. Black wings flap. Crowfall, my friend says, or branches shedding what won't stay. Exhausted by the fight to pay her bills, her constant pain, she says she'll find her dog another home, then walk into the desert. She thinks she's just one ripple quickly replaced by other ripples, and she isn't wrong. I too am just a wrinkle on the river's back. Meanwhile, there are reasons to be here, friends to walk with, wind in trees, the bright taste of kumquat on the tongue. Don't go, I say, hold on. And the second poem is from a recently published chapbook, which is called Cauldron of Hisses. This is one of the mountain lion poems. And the memory of the cougar is from a time in Northern California a few years ago up near Yosemite in a town called North Fork, which I'm thinking about returning to soon because I really need to go jump in a lake somewhere and be in the woods. So this is one of the mountain lion poems. Sometimes when I walk through a cool tunnel of trees, I think of her, the cougar who came quietly to the creek I sat beside, not seeing me, intent on the water pouring from the lake above. At first, she was the slightest flicker in the corner of my eye, tawny fur and tawny grass. Enough vision for one lifetime. May she stay away, since she came once. May she let me pass beneath these trees. May we live our separate lives. Thank you.
Okay, I guess I'm next. Can you hear me? Okay. I'm Joe Cottonwood. I live in the mountains in California, where cougars actually walk right by my house some nights, which is both lovely and a little scary. And John, you mentioned the Bolivar Free Press. I was just amazed because I have an ancestor who was the publisher of a different Bolivar newspaper. I believe it was the Bolivar Herald, which burned down under mysterious circumstances. It was a Democratic newspaper in a Republican town, and I think that had something to do with it. But anyway, that was an interesting connection there.
Indeed. I remember the Herald as well.
Oh, do you? Okay.
Very well.
C.D. Lyman was his name. Anyway, here's a poem from this upcoming summer issue of the Sheila-Na-Gig called The Stranger in the Car Behind. The stranger in the car behind. A mighty gust of fog rips 3 bicycles from the rope and bungee web atop my van to fly past the rear window as my gut drops in a center lane on the Golden Gate Bridge. So I stop. God help me. I stop. Jump out. Run back to where the stranger in the car behind, blessedly not a tailgater, braked in time, now has put on his blinkers and hustles forward as together under steel cables, while wet wind howls with diesel smoke as cars roar by on both sides, while an oil tanker glides beneath. He says not one word in the quick desperation, helps gather 3 bent bicycles from the roadway, which I stuff on top of 3 scared children as the stranger to whom I said not one word, not a thank you, not a moment for it, runs back to his car in the mad din of about 30 seconds while I hop into the driver's seat and stomp on the gas and gone. And the stranger, whoever, never asked to be a hero, pumped adrenaline, scrambled amid traffic where no trucks or buses plowed into us, survived and drove on and gone. So, to you, right here, right now, reading this poem, yes, you, to all you strangers in all the cars behind, let me say in advance, thank you. Bless you for what, without hesitation, you will do. Thank you so much. Now, if there's time, I'll read another one. This poem is also from Sheila-Na-Gig a couple years ago. In fact, it was, I think, one of the first Hayley accepted, and I want to thank you for bringing it to light, because it's turned out to be one of my most popular poems. It's been reprinted and anthologized. So thank you, Hayley, for getting that going. I'll give you a little backstory. A few years ago, I attended a wedding in a backyard of it was a very humble affair, a small gathering, because the bride's family, her parents and her entire family refused to attend. It seems the groom was the wrong color and the wrong religion. He had worked for me briefly in construction until he decided he'd rather drive a truck. So I was there at the wedding, and the bride and groom both had nothing in possessions, only love. But when I looked into the eyes of the bride, I could see the spirits of her whole family, the defiance, dancing in her eyes. It was just, there was no way her family could boycott that wedding. They were there, whether they liked it or not. So I wrote this poem, and it's called All of Your Ancestors come to your wedding. By horse, by canoe, they come, dressed in grass skirts and beaver pelt hats. They bring amphorae of wine, barrels of ancient beer. They fight, belch, kiss both cheeks. They hug too tight. They make ribald jokes. They embarrass you utterly. They paint flowers on your face and weave sunshine in your hair. They smoke sacred herbs. They chant, pound on drums, sing in lost language. They puff music in hollowed bamboo, dance in circles, juggle flaming torches. They draw antelope on the walls of your cave. As dowry, they bring generations of struggle, millenniums of sacrifice. They will come to your wedding, whether you invite them or not. Wish them welcome. Okay, thank you.
Okay, I guess I'm next. I'm Cynthia Anderson. I live in Yucca Valley, California. This first poem was from the most recent Sheila-Na-Gig. It's called The Final Wall. Thorough to the last, my parents make their arrangements, then take my brother and me to their resting place, a columbarium, stacked rows of boxes like lockers at an airport or bus station, a token lawn, traffic in the background. As we drive the gauntlet, the car fills with sadness, the certainty that the anger and agony of our family will end, and that my parents do this so we can visit them when they're ash behind metal. Please accept my regrets. I won't return to this place of ghosts. You'll find me wherever I am. So this second poem was also in Sheila-Na-Gig some issues back, but I've never read it at a reading here, so I thought I'd add this one in. It's called Arrival. Here is the light that allows another day to happen. Every living thing leans toward that beam from the east. Golden after the gray of dawn, a slight breeze stirring branches and leaves. This is what we came for, the light riding higher, lengthening shadows behind us. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. I'm Anastasia Vassos. I'm going to read a couple of poems. The first one was in Sheila-Na-Gig quite recently. It's titled, No Need to Tie Me to the Mast, I Can't Escape Anyway. The children next door laugh and play just to hear themselves. Their feet pound earth, that's how they run. Their mother, Dina, on her porch, negotiates on the phone. She's a portfolio manager. Another woman from 2 streets over walks her pit bull wailing like a wounded child. The pit bull, not the woman, when he sees another mutt approach from round the corner. Someone floats bubbles of quiet music out their window, and between the breaks, an opera tenor practices scales. Now 2 red cardinals on Vista Street tisk tisk their love. The female, a little rounder and more sublimely gossamer than the male's razor shape. Her red feathers the color of fading lipstick, and the wind bumps up against Rick's giant oak that I hope doesn't fall on my house. I remember how good it felt letting loose my lungs when I was a child and my friends and I played tag, how our squealing led to more whoops and yells, and that dog barking triggered by children squawking, because every poem needs a barking dog. And I wrote God instead of dog. It's shaggy and white. And suddenly I see Dina's hair has just been washed. That's why she's wrapped it tight in that white turban. Her hair unleashed blinks in the sun, sparkles and chimes. And yes, the wind's blowing. I'm glad she's not on speakerphone. I came out on the porch to read and relax. The afternoon sun dusking the day. Down the hill, a siren reports someone about to be born or someone about to die. A shift in frequency, dimming waves of sound. The second poem I'm going to read is from my book, Nike Adjusting Her Sandal. And I put the links to, if anyone is interested, in the chat, at the top of the chat. This poem is titled On Thera, and the Greeks sometimes have two different names for some of their islands. And Thera is also called Santorini. And the myth about Santorini is that it's the lost island of Atlantis. On Thera. On this white island ringed in blue and dust, we climb ghost steps leading up out of the cauldron. You and I are Greeks today, pretending we're on the surface of the moon. A widow dressed in black guards the church. Here at the edge of the Aegean, she tells us there's more wine than water, more churches than houses, more donkeys than people. Feed me a country that curves rogue waves round its edge, then returns them. I thirst, I hunger. Baffled crater, caldera, caldaria. Language laces my Greek tongue with the lips of a Spaniard. We're at the hem of the volcano. I lift my breast. I lift my dress, the breeze on my legs. Thank you.
That was beautiful. Hi, everybody. My name is Jane Muscianetz, and I'm so honored to be here. It was wonderful to hear John read and to hear everybody read as well. I don't have a book out. My first one's coming out in January from Kelsey Press. It's very exciting, and I put a link to my website, which has my poems in it. My first poem, Consequence, is from Sheila-Na-Gig. These bees in my garden are different bees. I can tell they are different by their more frantic buzzing. They're spooking into flight, a hint of danger, a hint of sweet, of necessary work. These bees do not tolerate my presence as a non-threat. Perhaps they are right. I did call the beekeeper out the other day to rehome the hive who swarmed in my cherry tree. Those bees were gentle souls, and they went easily into the kind beekeeper's box. How could these bees, the ones who remained, know that box was not a coffin? I can offer no guarantees that they would understand. The picture on my phone of that hive living by the sea in Point Loma means less than nothing to them. They turn away from me and dive deeper into the red-purple hearts of my gorgeously blooming poppies, flowers which I myself had planted, knowing full well and hoping even that bees would come. And the second poem I chose because of the diaspora topic. It's called Lviv, Ukraine, which is my hometown. And it speaks to the diaspora of the Eastern European immigrants of which I am one, but of all the generations. And it is the poem of the month in Mom Egg Review on May. Lviv, Ukraine. Long before Reuters and BBC reporters signed off from it, Lviv, Ukraine was my hometown. I knew it by another name, Lvov, Ukrainian Republic, USSR, is, like anyone's childhood, I suppose, a dot on the map of time that no longer exists. None of us can ever go back to our soul's point of entry into this world. Lviv was Ukrainian, Soviet, Russian, Polish, Slavic, Austro-Hungarian territory, and all of them hated the Jews more or less equally. You see how tugging one tongue can unspool the entire tapestry? Lvov is the name of my home city in Russian, which is my mother tongue. My father's first language was Yiddish, but that is also not the whole story. Simply another forbidden melody, a compromise of German and Hebrew, of heart and geography, a plundered treasure, reaching its golden roots all the way to Aramaic grains of sand. Ancient alphabets, some mystics believe, house the true name of God, once known, a word to unlock understanding. If only we could speak it, placing the right accent on the right syllable. Naming God is an ambition I do not share. I'm only trying to unpack one girlhood's worth of beginning. Each language a nesting doll, holding inside itself all the recipes and ingredients of a people, their poetry and their death certificates, their libraries, songs, and kill orders, health records, love letters, addresses we can't return to, and none of it is enough. I'm still looking to find the right word for where I come from, even though the news reports mention it hourly. Lviv, Ukraine. War, refugee, near constant bombardment. Bravery, devastation, one thing always means so many other things, and nothing has just one name to answer to, just one life to answer for. Thank you.
Jane, that was really amazing. I love that. My name is Tracy Mishkin. I'm Jane's cousin. My father's people are from over the border in Belarus. And we also have the Hungarian side. And like Jane said, it's complicated. I'm going to share two poems. The first one is called Wildfire, and it was published in Sheila-Na-Gig in this issue. And the second is Intruder. Both poems were inspired by the same pile of boards next to our house and are otherwise entirely devoid of connections to current events. Wildfire. Everything was in flames, books and newspapers, a pile of boards by the kitchen window. Hindsight said smoke crawled under the door for days. Logic said, where there's smoke. Spontaneous combustion isn't. Fire smolders inside us. We talked about the water like 60% of our bodies would be enough. We forgot the dull, crucial words like plan and share. We attended only to the shiniest things. We told ourselves that fire is just a faster kind of rust. We said we'd never reach the flash point. I wish we'd known that both flammable and inflammable both meant we'd be consumed. Intruder. Something lives in old lumber piled by the tool shed. The dogs howl and moan, probing the boards. Moonlight silhouette against the fence. A hint of teeth, dark fur. Raccoon or feral cat, perhaps. The woods are collapsing. Coyotes and deer straggle into suburban yards. Whatever it is, the dogs know it doesn't belong. curled under lumber, studded with nails. It cries, I am not a monster. I am. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Elaine Palencia. I live in Champaign, Illinois, across town from John Palen. I'm going to read two poems. The first one is in the current Sheila-Na-Gig, and it is set in Eastern Kentucky, where I'm from. It's called Fleeing Eden. A long trip for short legs we made through town and into the soft arms of the country. My father in overalls pushing the wheelbarrow, I dancing beside him in high summer down a dirt road past an old woman sitting on an older porch into deep trees beside a dark lake and around the lake to the head of a hollow where in a clearing the ground still bore the outline of a homestead. And a gnarled apple tree stood by limestone steps that ended in air. Under the tree lay a headless doll with a hole for a navel. We ate red apples, heady as hard cider, and my father set a sieve over the barrow, shoveled on henhouse soil, shook the sieve to make fine dirt for our vegetable garden, until with a shout, eyes rolling like a horse gone loco, he pulled me away from where the loam seethed with snakes wriggling from dead pearls. Hind brains in recoil, we hastened away, but not before I realized my father would die. Thus I fell into dualism, as one does in Eden. And the second poem was published in Sky Island Journal this spring. I'm sorry I didn't have it written in time for my most recent chapbook, How to Prepare Escargot. All those poems are about writing or writers. And this one is called The Poet's Assistant. I worked for him off and on for years. He didn't say much, but had kind eyes, except for the one time I tried to straighten up while he was out. There was a gracious plenty of tools, hand saws, planes, chisels, rulers, clamps, some I couldn't identify that he made himself, all manner of raw materials, and a big woven basket of spare parts he'd root around in, humming to himself. The room was cool with tall windows that somehow made their own weather. Some days the place smelled spicy and exotic, like a market in a faraway country. Other days of old clothes and defeat, like a Goodwill store. Mostly I swept up modifiers to compost in a hole out back, sprayed for cliches and non sequiturs, and dusted the books and the shelves where he stacked the finished product in leather-bound boxes, made, he said, from his skin, his idea of humor. The locked closet, who knows what was in it? He kept the key on a chain around his neck and, I know this because I went to the funeral, was buried with it. The family kept me on a couple of weeks to help empty the house. I was in no position to argue when they took the boxes to the landfill because, a cousin said, they made noises in the night. The day he died, the closet vanished. Where it had been, a flat wall. I drew a smiley face with wings on it and pocketed the marker. Then I dug up one of the gnarled plants growing in the compost and took it home too. I don't know why. Now, something's going on. At night, an eye opens on each leaf. Yesterday, one of his boxes flew past the window screaming, and when I pick up the marker, it vibrates as if demanding to be used. Thank you.
That concludes our readings for tonight. So I'd like to thank our open mic readers from Sheila-Na-Gig Online. And again, John Palen, so wonderful to hear you and see you and have the opportunity to publish your fine book. Thank you so much.
My pleasure entirely. Thanks, everybody. Wonderful readings, everyone.